So welcome back to the Evolving Warfighter. I'm Dr. Franklin Annis, and today I'm really excited to talk about what could be a revolution in military affairs. It's a approach to talent management that takes a competency-based look and may destroy some of the wasted time and credentialism that is currently employed in the military spectrum. So I am honored today to be joined by Lieutenant Colonel Caleb Walker, a man with over 20 years experience in the Canadian Armed Forces, including 3 tours in Afghanistan, and he wrote the Canadian Armed Forces Digital Strategy. And he is currently the Global Vice President for Defense for With You, With Me. Thank you for joining me today, sir.
Thanks very much, Franklin. I appreciate it.
So I gave you a brief introduction there, but is there anything else you want to say about yourself before we get into the conversation, sir?
No, just that, just a small thing is that I've been working in the veteran homelessness space in Canada for about 4 years before I got out of the military. And what I had noticed at the time is that you would spend hundreds of hours trying to help people find homes and help them in that situation. And the common thread I would get when I was talking to them was that there was something like it doesn't just happen. Like there was they were doing well in society, but there was a transition that didn't go so well, and then it kind of went down the further downhill. And so at the time, I was hoping that if you could fix that upstream problem, and help people transition quickly into meaningful employment where they have the right, because they already have a lot of experience, they have a lot of abilities that they can share, but they leverage. But we just have to be able to enable that potential, that transition to go faster. And so actually, that's when I saw With You, With Me, which was created about 6 years ago. I knew that it was something I wanted to be interested to get into.
Yeah, the whole transition adjustment disorders, and helping homeless veterans is definitely a problem that's worthy of being addressed, and one that always needs more attention in our societies. Could you give us a brief kind of overview of With You, With Me and how it works?
Yeah, no, it started about 7 years ago, actually now, in Australia. And the CEO, Tom Moore, he had gone through a transition. He had done time in the infantry in the Australian Army. And when he transitioned, he couldn't find any jobs, even though he had deployed, he's educated, very experienced, but he just couldn't find any follow-on employment. And so he thought he took it upon himself to try and find out how do you improve the veteran experience, because he had a lot of friends that they'd leave, they couldn't find meaningful employment and a sense of purpose, that kind of blame themselves, that it would affect their mental health, probably had more impact on their mental health than their actual deployments overseas. And so he wanted to help people do that transition. And for the first few years, it was more about trying to find jobs for veterans and then upskilling them quickly in whatever requirements so that they could be ready to do the job. But then he quickly worked out that a lot of those jobs that they were filling wasn't that difficult to upskill, particularly if you had the right veteran. And then how do you find that right person? You look at them based on their aptitude and their psychometrics to see what their pathway would be. And so using that kind of methodology over the last 7 years, we've been able to upskill about 10,000 veterans. We've been able, and then we've opened it up to military spouses, Indigenous people, Ukrainian and Afghanistan refugees. It's the same thing. We find what they're got well matched to, just on their potential, and then we get them jobs. And so we've gone from like just 30 people, we've hired to up to 500 veterans and military spouses over the last year and a half, and we've probably helped another 1,000 people using our training and our networking just to go get jobs on their own.
It's quite exceptional so far. So I do truly believe this could be a revolution of military affairs, because your system could theoretically help destroy some of the older hierarchies that have been just kind of carried on in the military. So the separation between the officer corps and NCO corps, Your approach, you may be able to jump people in between those traditionally restricted categories, so release a lot of the trapped talent that you have inside the organization. And you could also accelerate some individuals by making sure they're not caught in kind of very, very set, very long programming courses where they already have the competency for. So I know you spoke a little bit about how many people you've covered so far, but could you talk about kind of the current test pilot you've done, and then how you're trying or phasing or planning to grow the program further?
Yeah, no, so we obviously started from the social impact space, but we quickly worked out that to enable transitions quickly and effectively at scale is important for most large organizations, and particularly for closed labor markets like military and government, because they can't bring in, they find it difficult to bring in like a lieutenant colonel to come and do a lieutenant colonel's job, or a sergeant major to come do a sergeant major's job. And so they have to, but yet their expectations and their capabilities constantly change. So how do you like move that workforce around quickly? On top of that, back to the closed labor market, retention is a bit of a wicked problem. And so like any adjustment you do on incentives or on pay or on anything, it really, it could have big effects, second and third order effects onto the whole labor market. And so, yeah, we've worked out that the solution that we built, I guess we stumbled upon it when we were trying to help veterans get jobs, is that it's really good at helping organizations find potential in their own workforce, and then match them to career goals that they can chase themselves, and then mobilize them so they can be upskilled quickly into new roles, and then make sure they're successful. And so that's important not only for the military to build new capabilities and to always have the flexibility of changing as it goes, but it also is very important for internal, like a lot of the digital natives want to have that flexibility in their own careers and not have to just, go through the conveyor belt of careers as they go. And so it's not as typical, and it's like in today's society, to stay in a role for 30 to 40 years. There has to be some ability to adjust and continue. Does that make sense, Franklin?
Yes, and I think hopefully you didn't touch upon it. I think one of the bigger pressing issues with the current environment is, hey, if militaries go in and we have another large-scale military conflict, hey, another world war, like traditionally what we do is just kind of move everybody up ranks and then just kind of fill in the new folks at the bottom. But here you really have a program that could really go through your workforce and really do a lot more targeting impact in terms of who has the competency to shift up and who would be the most talented to move into what positions if you had to kind of rapidly expand your military to go fight a major conflict.
Yeah, and the analogies, there's several of them, but one would be, is there an NCO, a Combat Arms NCO, that has the potential, like they have the right behaviors and they have the right aptitude to learn the skills fast, that can go and be upskilled quickly to become like an intelligence officer? And so to your point, that's important when you have to scale ×3. You have to work out like what would be the right fit for all these different roles so you can kind of scale safely. But then, as well internally, and even in a peacetime army, it's important for, if that sergeant wants to stay in that location because of a posting preference for his family, maybe his children or teenagers, and he doesn't want to take them out of school, but there's no sergeant's positions for them to do. Well, what other meaningful employment can we find that person internal to the military so they can be successful? And so, yeah, like on a large scale, that's kind of what we want to do, is be able to kind of move the talent quite quickly, and then work out all the skills that you would need along the way, and then map out like the credentialing or the pathway so that you can adjust quickly into these different roles, which would be important if you've done that correctly, to know the credentialing and the mapping it out well, that if someone gets out of the military for 2 to 3 years, but they do something that's actually kind of pretty similar, or something that's actually probably even more helpful for them, then you can bring them back in, and maybe at a different rank. Like they might have left as a junior NCO, or but they wanted to go do something, like don't want to jump out of airplanes anymore. They want to do something that's kind of intellectually stimulating, like more intellectually stimulating. Also, jumping out of airplanes is quite stimulating. So they go away, they do education, and they get like 5 years of experience in a management job, in some kind of IT role, or in some kind of like whatever, legal or whatever. And then if you map it out, you can work out what credentialing they've done outside, so they can come in faster, and maybe at even a different rank level. And so instead of looking at that, like later in their 20s, they've gone away and they've come back as that same person. No, they've actually changed quite a bit. That just kind of gives the flexibility. And it's important because not only does it give a flexibility for the organization right now, but like it keeps some of that skill and that talent that you can feed back to solve your complex problems. How do you build like a space force? I guess you could try and just go to all the universities and hope you find like a really high-tech talent, but maybe there's people that have left that actually know like the domain or security, or all the enablers that you need, not just the actual rocket scientists. And they were in the military and they left, but then they can come back in at a different level, and it allows just that better that flexibility to scale a capability. That's essentially, so that's what we've done with our platform to allow that. Does that make sense?
Yes, and well, from my field, so kind of my background studying military education, I love the implications for this model, because really we've arrived to a battlefield where all the possible things a soldier might need to know to fight well on the battlefield is there's not enough time to train soldiers for everything. So we really have to encourage soldiers to learn the skills to continue their own training, their own interests, their own learning outside the kind of strict courses that we give soldiers. And your talent management approach is really rewarding soldiers to say, hey, if you're interested and you're kind of have a hobby to go home and learn computers, or they'll learn a foreign language, or learn this or learn that somewhere down the line you can go through another assessment, really demonstrate your competency through your own self-study and your interest, and then you can move into a position that more aligns with your personal interests and advances both the interest of the individual and the organization, while really giving a huge boost of steroids to encourage that, hey, go learn something on your own time, and don't wait for someone to tell you to go learn something new.
Yeah, well, because we do the testing up front, and you can do the testing every year, but it gives you recommendations of like you'd be well matched for whatever role, and you probably that's important at the start, because when I joined the military, I went out of the high school, and I went out of the 18 people that graduated my high school class. 6 of them became farmers, 6 of them joined the military, and 6 of them kind of just hanged around in the town. And it wasn't because we were predisposed to be great farmers and military. It's because that's all we heard about, right? And so by doing that kind of testing, it allows you to do that self-reflection, so they can map out their career path as they go. And then the important thing about the mapping out the skills and the credentialing in a proper manner, as we've kind of done, is that it's outcome based. So that's the issue with a lot of professional development, is that you give people time and money and they go do training. And sometimes it's good not to have like an end point, because then you can be a bit more creative. But for a lot of people, like if they knew that there was like an outcome, that they could actually go to that pathway and they could become that thing, or learn that skill, or have that ability, then they'd be more interested in actually doing that training on their own to get to that outcome. Because everyone's pretty jobs related. Like they see a job or they see an opportunity that they want to do, that will motivate them to do the upskilling to get to that point.
Yeah, the return on investment is definitely a lot more clear in your type of approach than just kind of a general self-interest type of learning.
Mm-hmm. No, and yeah, it's I think like we're gonna see probably more and more where you're gonna need a lot of the soldiers and the NCOs and the officers to have like different ability to change their and upskill into different roles in a dynamic manner. And you've kind of seen a little bit play out Ukraine right now, where it's like a very hierarchical system where the NCOs and junior officers aren't allowed, for the Russian military, sorry, for them to actually adjust as required to the changing dynamic. And it gets them into a lot of trouble where they are not having the flexibility to use mission command properly. But if you give the tools and the ability for people to solve these complex problems in their hands a bit easier, then we're going to need that. So that way they can go and solve it on their own, because that's what they do.
So one of the great things that I really liked about your program is that one of your heavy matrix that you use is what's called the Big Five, or the 5-factor personality model. It's probably the most valid and most reliable of the personality tests. It's really probably the most reliable test inside social science, as far as I know. IQ might be the next one that's close to it, which measures an individual on kind of 5 dynamics. So their openness to new ideas, their conscientiousness, their extroversion, agreeableness, and their neuroticism. And then from the results from that, it can be predictive in terms of what type of environments they may like to be in. It might be predictive of how creative they are. It's also predictive in terms of how people think politically. There's a strong correlation, which can be dangerous for the military, because we have a very strict hierarchy, and we like certain types of behaviors, and we promote based on the behaviors we want to see. And sometimes we filter out kind of the really best, most creative or innovative thinkers, because people really tend to be open and playful with ideas. They tend to want to speak truth without really caring about other people's feelings. And if you look at kind of the huge, really hyper creative CEOs like Steve Jobs, Elon Musk, you get kind of those conflict based personalities where either you like them or you totally hate them. But those individuals often get stripped out through the ranks as they move up. But your program actually could better match people's personality traits with problem sets. And I wanted to get into kind of how your system might build teams, or more importantly, does your system allow kind of some more of the safeguarding for the really hyper creative individuals to get them where they need to be on the battlefield to figure out how to do things, to be turned over to people that can then run the process once it's figured out.
Yes, no, it's a big issue in the military. Is not only there's a possibility that people that are quite creative would not join because of the structure and the hierarchy in the military, but as you indicated, some of the roles that they would be forced to do or they would do in their career would inevitably weed them out, or a change, like their personalities would change based on the socialization of being in the organization, which is a shame, because you need that kind of creative and aspects to the roles so that you can be successful. And so typically when we're looking at a different kind of role or different kind of job or different kind of team we need to build, we try and work out what the team's going to be doing, and if they have to be quite creative, and if they have to be quite creative and they have to come up with a new idea that hasn't really been thought about before, and we make sure we have a high number of creative people in that team. And we also then look at the DISC metrics and models, so we can see how that team would interact in the right way, so that they don't tear themselves apart. It's creatives can be good. They kind of can be on the same wavelength. We find. But then you have to make sure the team is you can't just have creatives because all they'll do is just riff ideas. They have to at some point work with people that are doers. They like structure and process, and they like to get stuff done. But sometimes those two people don't communicate very well, or they just have to be conscious about how they would communicate, because and so sometimes we put translators in between to make sure that we can communicate appropriately. But yeah, we use the behavioral test, the Big Five that you're talking about, to try and match people into roles where they'll kind of be successful long term. Anyone can probably do a job for a bit, but if they aren't well matched behaviorally to that role, then they'll get sick of it and they'll probably want to leave. or they just won't want to be that invested in it. And an example of that is, like, I had done the behavioral tests later in my career, but when I was in the Army's operations, the G3 shop, I had I was supposed to be, I was in charge of the tasking, so I was in charge of the day-to-day taskings for the Army, and I wasn't like very conscientious about it. I would always be thinking about big ideas. I'd always be putting together briefing notes about like big changes we probably need to do to the whole system, and I'd always be kind of thinking on the box. At the time, the Army G3 said, "Hey, you're not a big picture person. Sorry, you're not a day-to-day person. You're a big picture person." And at the time, I took that as a bit of an insult because you know, in the Army, you always kind of have to be ops, ops, ops. That's like the most important thing, is to be ops focused. But if you, and so, but like after doing the testing and looking at my psychometric testing, it's quite true. Yeah, I'm not very conscientious. I am more of a creative person, which actually, if the military was to use that kind of knowledge well, then they would try and use those people to drive change and to think outside the box and create creative solutions, and not post them into operations jobs. Realistically, I've done an operations job like a unit ops, you know, brigade and formation ops, joint ops, and I did Army ops. So probably like 6 years of my career where they put me into a job where I probably was not the right fit for it. And so that's just like matching like the right personality to roles to get them to get them moving. And so like that's how we try and look at people. That way we don't we have longer success in those roles, and then therefore the teams can kind of be formed better.
So just so I understand your program correctly, so I come in, first thing I do is I take a kind of a series of tests or assessments, determine my interests and personality types. I think that you said the last time we spoke it takes about 90 minutes in total would go through that process. Is that correct?
That's right, yeah.
So, and it's nicely broken down, so you don't have to sit for a 90-minute period. You can kind of do it in 10-minute increments. And then from that time, you know, I can figure out my interests, and then I can either have access to kind of training modules that if I don't have the skills or knowledge of what I'm interested in, I can go through the program and learn the information I need to do. But if I do have that information, then I can go into essentially a type of competency test that's kind of team-based. Is that correct? Could you talk a little bit more about how you do the kind of team-based competency tests?
Yeah, well, you can do individual competency tests to prove that you have the knowledge, and then we can work for you to progress further in it, so you don't have to redo stuff. Yeah, we typically, to get people ready for roles, we would follow the same kind of model that you would do to get ready for people to get ready for deployment. And so we would make sure everyone's got the individual training done. So we've built a team, make sure everyone's done the individual training, and then we do a collective training set or a capstone exercise or a boot camp where everyone works together to solve the problem as a team, because you might need some, like in the technology realm, you might need computer programmers, you might need data analysts, you might need business analysts, you might need a project manager. So how do they all work together to deliver a solution, leveraging the strengths of each person in the team so that they can be successful together? And so that way, by working as a team and like leveraging that, you're able to solve problems faster. And it's easier to actually solve the problem, and then having to find like a unicorn, like a person that knows all the things all by themselves and does it all by themselves. Like that's not, you can't scale that. So you have to be able to work out and how like different people can add value to this solution, so you can go faster. And so yeah, the collective training, we would call it, I guess, that's how we would do the competency to make sure that they can do the job with the rest of the team.
So one of the biggest problems I see inside the military, and really, at least in the United States, it's becoming a huge problem with our educational kind of workforce, is credentialism. So instead of sending a kid to college, because kind of college at, you know, if you go back a couple generations, was really hyper exclusive. So either you were kind of came from a wealthy family, or you're really intelligent enough to qualify for college. A college degree was really worth something in terms of investing or at least selecting the kind of pinnacle of the intelligent people in society. But now our opportunities in our colleges have expanded. A tremendous amount of people have access to college. So now it's much more difficult for, well, whether it's both the military or civilians, to sort through people that are looking for jobs. So they just start defaulting to say, well, we need a bachelor's degree, and that helps us kick off and, you know, cut down the amount of resumes we have to go through. Or you see it in the military where it's like, hey, but, you know, bachelor's degree used to be required for an officer. Now at the 10-year mark, we're going to now ask for a master's to be a field grade officer, because, you know, we're kind of falling behind in terms of the connection between that education certificate and what the actual performance we want to see. And we even see the growth, at least in the U.S. Army, with bachelor's degrees now becoming required for like sergeant majors. So we seem to collect all these courses, and then anyone that's been in the service always complains about having to go attend some type of course that ultimately becomes like a check the block type course. So the military wants to have kind of valid measures of academic models. So they go to the civilian world, and then what they do is just basically import the kind of set time period academic type courses that everybody has to go through regardless of their skill. And what can end up happening is people invest tons of years of their career to gain these markers of success that really don't add any value into the military themselves. So you spoke before about, you know, hey, if I had a infantryman that's really interested in intelligence, maybe he's gone out on operations, he has the skills, he has the competency to operate as an officer. Do I really want to waste time sending him away for 4 years to get a college degree when I could, you know, put him right in the position of an officer? If he clearly has the competencies to function that way, he has the intelligence for it, why would I want to waste that? And I could really hand back the military years of service out of the same amount of personnel. So, you know, I think your program really has a tremendous amount of promise in terms of inspiring self-development, making sure the education courses that we're offering are truly necessary, you know, aligning job to personal interests, which, you know, everyone performs better in a job that they want to be doing versus, you know, something they don't want to. And it really opens up far more capabilities inside the military to kind of do the things that we want to do. And I know I spoke about this the last time I talked to you, is at least in my organization, I see a tremendous amount of soldiers that maybe get full-time positions when they're younger, and they go into a very hyper-specialized specialty, and that specialty inside the military only has a certain kind of cap in the rank and the force structure, and they have a tremendous amount of talent, but they spend most of their career in the lower grades because there's no clear path without compromising their families or their financial security to try to reach higher inside the organizations, all of which that your model could potentially solve. So I definitely wish you the best in terms of trying to expand and grow upon this program.
Yeah, thanks very much. No, it's that's quite true. Is that like the university credentialing has kind of lost its way in a bit in the job market, and definitely it used to probably mean something to have a bachelor's degree, because that means you could probably use Word documents and Excel properly, which was what the market needed. But now the market is getting a bit more complex. Like, you need to be able to use some low-code solutions to drive business operations, and or you need to be able to like have a bit more different diverse skills to add value to that problem. And so yeah, we're hoping to reduce that barrier, because yeah, it's a bit of a social economic thing, is that if you just didn't have money to go to school, then therefore you're kind of kept out of like this certain pathway for no real reason, even though everyone knows that that person's probably the smartest person in the room. So how do you help them get enabled? And it's pretty important right now, because of the way that the cost of schooling, or that people aren't seeing the real value out of a degree as much as they used to, is that I think statistically, digital natives are 62% of them have no interest in actually going to do a university degree. And so like there's pushback now of like, why am I going to go do this 4-year degree if it doesn't actually lead to anything in the future? Yeah, so that would be a concern that you would want to have if your benchmark for having officers, as an example, in the military is to have this degree. Then if 62% of digital natives don't want to do that, then your recruiting is not going to be that good either. So and they're going to be asking you like, why do I have to do this for 4 years? Is it because that's how it has always been, or there's an actual output, or it's connected to a capability you're trying to build? And then if I do this university degree in English studies, then that means I can't do majority of the roles that might be required in the future. And so like I just wasted 4 years on a degree that only has a certain applicability to the larger domain of where the military is required to do in the next 10 years. So yeah, it's not only is there not a lot of people want to join to do that, but then it doesn't probably add a lot of value to the market, and it makes a lot of silos and reduces capability for people to move their career with flexibility.
In many ways, I think that the education kind of model, especially over the last couple of generations, have really started falling apart in terms of, at least in the United States military, we have a very kind of old and historic reference that goes all the way back to the early 19th century, where we can say kind of this is what the expected education model for a Army officer would be. That was very clearly defined, and at some point in the future, the Army is going to have to ask its hard question of saying, if this is historically what we thought of as a bachelor's degree, and that's no longer the equivalent of what most colleges are producing, does the military start their own education model to teach that bachelor's degree, or do we just give up on that credentialing model and find some other way to achieve that same type of education?
Yeah, it would open up a lot more, because then you could even, if you mapped it out right, then you could even work out people that maybe haven't finished high school. Like, how can they be successful faster? And then how could their pathway, just because of whatever situation they had, they can finish off that requirements, the skills that they needed that could have been covered by, high school, and then map it out so that they can be successful in their military career, which would adjust your whole like your recruiting as well, and other possibilities.
Yeah, interestingly enough, in the early days of the U.S. Military Academy at West Point, under Captain Alden Partridge, there was a construct that essentially there was a list of competencies that a soldier needed to know, or an officer needed to know, but you could walk into West Point and then theoretically a year later graduate for West Point. So even though it was a 4-year curriculum, if you could do all the math problems, if you understood the foreign languages, if you could do the engineering aspects, you could just graduate. It's like, we're not holding you for 4 years just to say that the degree has value. It's like, once you've demonstrated that you have the knowledge and competency, then go do your job. Which, ideally, I couldn't imagine a modern education system not wanting to go to that approach to say, as soon as you reach the correct level, go be productive.
Yeah, especially it's crazy, especially when university is so expensive. Like the fact that universities have been able to not have to have like expectations of career successes and jobs outside, but the expectation is still that you go do this university degree, even though it has nothing to do. I guess you start to see a little bit, like some people are able to go into like law school maybe like almost all immediately. They don't even need that 4-year degree in some countries, and so there's some people question it, but it does create huge barriers as of right now. Yeah, and so that's what we're trying to do is to map it out, how you would be able to, based on your potential, go through your career, and then on the other hand of it as well is capture the information and engage with the person throughout their careers, so you can understand like why they might want to like leave. And so that would help with the wicked problem, is like hey, like this person like based on their aptitude and their psychometrics and like their feedback, they are looking for this opportunity. They don't really see it. Is there a way that we could build out a path for them so that they could see what that could look like, so they could get that change that they're looking for that still works for the military as a whole? So that way you can kind of keep that engagement with them. And they might even, the engagement might be that they might leave the military and go part-time, but then come back like 5 years later, and that's still a good outcome, because then you're just increasing that timeline of engagement. So instead of just doing like a 20-year career as a 20-year career, maybe you get like a 30-year career over 40 years by allowing people to kind of come in and out over the time. So that would be, yeah, that's kind of like the larger domain. Like, to be honest, I think I actually want to send our platform. You kind of got me into the education stuff now. I want to send it to all the universities for free, probably this year, because I think it would be kind of useful for a lot of the university students that have just done 1 to 2 years of school, and they're like, why am I here? And now I'm just going to be trying to finish this credentialing, so I'm just going to like double down on the sunk cost, and so hopefully we can show through the testing, like all the different opportunities you can do, and all the trainings for free, and just they can, like, maybe someone can find themselves instead of just like doubling down on the slow grind of a university degree.
I brought this point up the last time I talked to you, but I really like your system because it's technically not linear in terms of our current model. You basically have to stay at your current level or move up, or you get kicked out essentially. But theoretically, it's like, hey, I've worked as a upper level staff officer for a decade. I've lost touch. Theoretically, you could request like, hey, I really need a sabbatical. Like, can you come send me down to be a company XO for a year? That way I can get experience, understand what the companies are doing. I can take a break from, whatever Department of the Army level stuff, get back down to the troops, kind of get refreshed, and I'll come back a year from now with kind of more insight about, how communication is flowing up and down the chain, and, are we being successful communicating what we want? And your model would allow for something like that much more efficiently than what we currently have, where, at least in the current construct of the American military, once an individual moved out of that chain, everybody else would move up, and there wouldn't be a way of, temporary filling a gap or holding positions, or at least doing career management where we could allow for kind of more flexibility inside the force.
Yeah, no, it's it'd be controversial, but maybe there's some senior NCOs out there that are like in their mid to late 20s, and they're like, what, I actually want to be the company commander, and so just through some credentialing and some skills, they would change quite quickly and quite rapidly to do that, and instead of having to almost have really no pathway. But if they did have a pathway, they'd have to go through a whole bunch of and so, which would mean that people probably would be competing to do certain positions based on their competency and their plan and their potential, instead of what typically happens in the military is you kind of just like, you're just going through the positions, and it's almost like most people kind of know who will get promoted based on the positions that they do, and so the positions that they have to do is how they get promoted. And so, typically you have to do a certain amount of deployments and a certain amount of operations jobs and a certain amount of executive assistant positions. And so, like that, in a way, like there's no reason, like they're not competing for any of those jobs really. They're just kind of doing the jobs to go through the process. And so by allowing that flexibility in the workforce, you kind of make those positions more competitive and get the right person for the right job.
Yeah. Well, and really, it's got to be nothing but a benefit for the organization, because if you had several more people competing for the same leadership position, you have a larger talent pool to pull the best leader. And really, I can say the controversial thing is, in at least the modern U.S. Army, what's the difference between a platoon leader and a platoon sergeant? Like, if one of them dies, the other one can easily assume the other positions and absorb those responsibilities. So, you're talking about moving from a platoon sergeant to a company commander. Well, on the battlefield, that could realistically happen. A couple people die, and all of a sudden you have that gentleman acting or woman acting as in that role. So, why not have a way or a path? And this comes back to the I guess a bigger question is, when you're kind of pitching or trying to integrate this into the military, Are you facing any resistance just because it's kind of more, it's such a radical approach, and especially when you're talking, historical hierarchy systems, especially, which, the officer corps and NCO corps is really an outdated class-based society system that no longer exists, but yet we hold on to it. And I couldn't imagine trying to convince people to let go of it.
No, it's obviously quite a controversial concept. Luckily for us, most Western, and unfortunately for them, most Western organizations militaries are having a hard time with both recruitment and retention. To be honest, actually, a lot of these conversations we're having, like, I think the senior leaders are actually like acknowledging like that they can't keep doing this the same way. Like they're never going to find enough people for their Space Force. They're never going to find enough people for their Cyber Command. They're never going to find enough people that can do like a new capability or like work with the data. And so like they're going to have to look at people a bit differently to build capabilities out. And we had done one study for the Australian Army where we worked out like what the future of their workforce would be. And a lot of their positions will be automated and augmented by like 50% or 60% over the next 10 years. Like the company clerk, I think we talked about this last time. The company clerk, realistically, a lot of their job could be automated and augmented. And so, like, what does their job look like, and who can do their job, and like what other parts of the military's capability can now be absorbed? And so, like that whole flexibility is going to have to be more and more important over the next couple of decades, while there's a massive like digital transformation that's going on into all roles, which is going to require more flexibility of the workforce to go into all these different roles. Otherwise, you won't be able to find the talent to solve any of your problems. Otherwise, you'll have to try and get a consultant to come do it, which is far more expensive. And there's issues with bringing in consultants as well. Guess what? Like a lot of those system integrators and the organizations out there that are trying to solve your problem, they have the same problem as well. Like they can't find enough talent to do all these problems. So you might as well just bite the bullet and try and build those talent internally so you can drive the outcome and success you're looking for. So yeah, with every great shortage and problem, I guess there's an opportunity. And so yeah, there is some people like, yeah, does this really work? But luckily we've got a few use cases now that show that it does. And so people are starting to buy in and go, okay, like what could be the next step? So obviously we've discussed like the extreme version, but like it would be great if you had even in the Army Reserves, the National Guard, if you didn't have a certain course happening, but you had NCOs there that could be kind of taking the credentialing and marking people through, people could kind of come in, learn how to clean, use, fire a rifle. They're like getting their credentials through, and then they can kind of like, they have from there all the way to the other end, they can kind of like move their career around, and they don't have to just like wait till the next course or the next opportunity to happen. They can go learn how to use a heavy machine gun by just taking the equipment out and learning how to use a heavy machine gun. They don't have to wait for the heavy machine gun course, which might only happen once a year or once every 2 years. And like this year when the course was happening, they couldn't do it because they were away on deployment or something. So they don't learn that system for 3 years. And so yeah, I think that it is a bit of a controversial and a bit of a revolutionary idea, but I think we're starting to prove out some use cases.
Well, I think we covered most of your program. Did we miss any big items that you want to discuss?
No, I think that was great. Thanks very much. I enjoyed talking about it and the conversation.
So for the audience out there that wants to know more about your program, could you tell us about your website or any social media contacts you'd like to give?
Yeah, just you can check out withyouwithme.com or myself. You can check out Caleb Walker on LinkedIn or send me an email, just Caleb, CALEB, @withyouwithme.com, and I can answer any questions that you have. Yeah, I enjoyed the chat. I love talking about this stuff.
Yeah, well, I greatly appreciate you taking the time today to talk with me, and I look forward to hearing about your progress and the expansion of your program, sir.
Yeah, thanks very much, Frank.
For the audience out there, I invite you to subscribe to the Evolving Warfighter for more videos on military history and military self-development. Until next time, focus on your self-development so we can dominate the modern battlefield. Thank you.